darkness, sin and misery, which I had left. If I could just but spend another lifetime among the lost and dying and truly follow the Lord. But that could not be. My opportunities of earth were past. Heaven must now be my dwelling forever. And contrary as it may seem, this thought filled my soul with unspeakable regret. And then came another thought, more wilder than that bad gone one before. You must remember that this is a vision that I'm relating to you. It was this. Would it be possible for me to obtain permission to go back to the world, to that very part of it from which I had come, clothed in some human form, and live my earthly life over again, live it in a manner worthy of my profession, worthy of Christ and my opportunity? Could this be? If at that moment any answer in the affirmative had been brought to me, I would have gladly given up my heavenly blessedness. I would have gladly undergone ages of hardship, in agony, poverty, and pain, and I would have given up $1 million in money. Yes, I would have gladly given a world if I had been mine to give. But I could see no hope for a second probation. What was to be done? I had not been misusing it in this way for many seconds, for thoughts appeared to flow with remarkable rapidity. When, quick as a lightning flash, one of those bright inhabitants which I had watched floating afar off in the clouds of glory descended and stood before my extinguished gaze. I can never forget the awestruck feeling which I beheld this heavenly being. Describe the shape and feature and bearing of this noble form I cannot, and I will not attempt it. He was at the same time angelic and human, earthly and yet celestial. I discerned, therefore, at a glance that he was once of a blood-washed multitude who had come out of the great tribulations on earth. I not only judged from a certain majestic appearance which he bore, but from instinct I felt that being before me, it was a man, a redeemed and glorified man. He looked at me, and I could not keep from returning his gaze. His eyes compelled me, and I confess I was ravished by his beauty. I could never have believed the human face divine could ever be so grand a stamp of dignity and charm. By far beyond the entrancing loveliness of this celestial feature was the expression which filled his total countenance and shone through the eyes that were gazing upon me. It was as though the faces were only a sunlit window, through which I could see into the depths of the pure, kindly, and tender soul within. I didn't know how I'd looked to my beautiful visitor. I didn't know what form I had. I had not seen myself in the mirror since I had taken on immortality for mortality. It was evident that it had a deep interest in me, but it was an interest which seemed to bring sadness to him. His features seemed to me to grow almost sorrowful as I sat there with my eyes fixed on him in a fascinating spell. He spoke first. He had not done so, and I could never have summoned courage to address him. His voice was soft and musical, and fitted well with the seriousness of his bearing. I understood him almost before I heard his words, although I could not tell now what language he spoke. I suppose it was the universal language of heaven. This was the substance of what he said. My arrival was known throughout a certain district of the celestial region, where were gathered the ransomed ones who had come from the earthly neighborhood where I had lived. The tidings of my arrivals had been flashed through the heavenly telephone, which spoke not only in one ear only, but in every ear in that particular region. My name had been whispered in every hillside and echoed in every valley, and I had been spoken in every room of every mansion. It had been proclaimed from every tower and pinnacle of the stupendous temple in which these glorified saints, day and night, present their worship to the great Father. All who had known me on earth, all who had any knowledge of my family, my opportunities for helping forward the kingdom of Christ, whom they worshipped and adored, were burning to see me and hear me tell of the victories I had won and the souls had blessed while on earth. And all were especially anxious to hear if I had been the means of bringing salvation to the loved ones which they had left behind.
I don't know if you can hear this. When he's on the other side, he feels like he could come back. Because now he can see what he had done doesn't help. He sees the need of doing the work of God while he's on side. In his vision. Can I be given an opportunity to go back?
lonely.
He feels lonely while he's in heaven.
And then Sekachaza lo muntu oza kuye.
Then he explains this
And
person
lo
who
muntu
approached him.
nakambheka omunye wabazalwane.
When he looks at this person,
Abake
it's one of the
babakhona
believers
emhlabeni.
that was once on earth.
Kukhulunywa ngaye everywhere manje.
Everywhere it's talked about him.
Hey ukhona ufikile omunye obuye emhlabeni.
It is said that there is one who's from
Bonke
earth.
bafuna ukumuzwa ukuthi ingabe usebenze njani.
All of them want to hear as to how he worked.
Ingabe ulihambisile yini ivangeli.
Did he transport the gospel?
Uyayizwa le uyayibona le picture le.
Can you see this vision?
Kodwa yena uyazazi ukuthi akenzanga
But he
lutho
himself, he knows he didn't do anything.
okuyela lapho.
That is according to the message.
Uziphilele the way athanda ngakho.
He lived as he pleased,
Umzalwane.
as a believer.
Qhubeka.
All this was poured upon my soul. I didn't know which way to look. Again and again, I remembered my life of ease and comfort. What could I say? How could I appear with a record of my life before these waiting ones? What was there in it except a record of self-gratification? I had no martyr stories to tell. I had sacrificed nothing worth naming on earth, much less in heaven, for his dear sake. My mind was running in this direction when I think my visitor must have discovered something of what I was thinking and felt pity for me. Seeing my consternation, he spoke again. Where you find yourself is not actually heaven, he said, but only a forecourt, a sort of outer circle. Presently, the Lord himself, with a great procession of his chosen ones, will come to take you into the celestial city itself. There is where your residence will be if he deems you worthy.
Yes.
Can you hear that?
Ucabanga ukuthi ungaphakathi kanti
He
usegate.
thought he was inside, but he's still
Hayi
by the
inkosi
gate.
iseza la
And it
izazokuhlangabeza.
was said, the Lord is still
Uma
coming to
ibona
collect you.
kufanelekile ikufaka izakufaka nangabe
If
ingaboni
seen
njalo
worthy, he will
awungeni.
enter you. If he doesn't, you won't enter.
There is where your residence will be if he seems and deems you worthy. That is, if your conduct on the battlefield below has pleased him. Meanwhile, I had obtained permission to come and speak to you concerning a soul who is very dear to me.
Hayi nayo ke ingxaki.
Here's
Lo
the problem.
mzalwane,
This brethren,
lo mzalwane lo
This
omtshela ukuthi hayi akusike ezulwini awukangeni phakathi.
the one who's telling him that this is not heaven, you're not here inside.
Inkosi isazokuhlangabeza la
The
isho
Lord
ukuthi
will still
uyangena or
come
awungeni.
and declare whether you're
Kodwa
coming in or not.
nginikweze ipermission ukuthi ngize kuwe.
But I've been given a permission to approach you
Ngizokubuza ngomphefumulo othile.
and just to ask you about a certain soul.
Qhubeka ke.
I understand he lives in a neighborhood where you recently lived
Uhlala la uhlala ngakhona.
and from which you have just come.
La ubuya khona.
Our knowledge of the affairs of earth is, for our own sakes, limited. But now, then we are permitted to go and have a glimpse. Can you, he said, tell me anything about my son? He was my only son. I loved him dearly. I loved him too much. I spoiled him when a child. He had his own way. He grew up willfully, passionate and disobedient, and my example didn't help him. Here, a cloud for a moment came over the beautiful brow, but vanished as quickly as it came. Memory has been busy, but that is all gone, he said, as though talking to himself, and then he finished the story of his prodigal son. He, the father, had been rescued, washed, regenerated. He had learned the flight for souls, and had won many to the blood-stained banner. Then he had suddenly been taken in death by an accident at his work and was taken to heaven. And now, he added, where is my boy? Give me tidings of my boy. He lived near you and had business dealings with you. What did you do for him? Is there hope? Tell me what his feelings are today. He stopped speaking. My heart sank within me. What could I say? I knew the boy. The story of the father's death and his prodigal son had been told me. I had never spoken one serious word to the boy about his soul and about his Savior. I had been busy about other things. And now, what could I say to his father, who stood before me? I was speechless. The cloud that I had noticed before again came over the face of my visitor, but with a dark shadow this time. He must have gazed the truth. He looked at me with a look at which I felt that disappointment to himself and a pity for me were combined. He then spread his wings and flew away. I was so intently gazing after his retreating From that I had noticed a second fair being who had descended from above, and who now occupied the place abandoned only a moment before my last visitor. I turned and looked upon the newcomer. This was the spirit of the same class, of the same ransom multitude who once were dwellers on earth. There was a dignity of bearing, the same marvelous expression of inward power and purity and joy. But in this case, there was a beauty which I could have imagined of more delight and delicate and a thrilling mold, because as I might had my first visitor to me, more beautiful than conception or dream of earth could be, yet here was a beauty that I'd surpassed, not perhaps if judged from heaven's view, but judged from my standpoint. For it must be remembered that I was still a man. My former visitor had said was a glorious man. This was evidently the glorified form of a woman.
A second person approaches him.
Loya azange ayitholi answer.
The one was never given an
Wenzani
answer.
ngomfana wami?
What did you do with my boy? Nothing.
Makhelwane wakhe.
He was his
Baba wakhe
neighbor.
washona usezulwini.
His father died
Wenze
in
kahle
heaven.
phambi kwenkosi manje
Did well in
umntana wakhe
front of God,
akasindiswanga.
but his
Lo
child is
mzalwane
not
uhlala
saved.
same street akamncedi
This
ngalutho.
brethren lives in the same street. He hasn't helped him.
So lo baba cabanga ukuthi lo mhlamba angakwazi ukunginika impendulo.
Now this man thinks that he's one
Akazange
can give him
amtshele.
help. He never told him.
Uhambile udisappointed.
And then he left
Kuzo
disappointed.
wesibili ke.
A second one approaches.
Lo ngathi umama lo.
This is like a woman.
So naye ngathi khona into azoyisho.
I had, when on earth, sometimes thought that I could have wished for a privilege of beholding Eve in an hour when she came forth from the hands of her Maker. And I had imagined something, only something, of what her beautiful form must have been as she sprung into the being on that bridal morning, young and pure and beautiful, the fair image of her Maker, perhaps the sweetest work of God. Now, here I saw her. I saw Eve reproduced before my eyes as young, pure, and beautiful, even more beautiful than her first mother could possibly have been, for what not his finished work. But I was soon awakened from my dream by the voice of the fair creature who, from her manner, evidently wished to speak to me, once some matter of great importance. She told me her name, and I heard it on the earth. She was a widow who had struggled through the great difficulties. Her husband's death had resulted in her conversion to Christ. Converted, she had given herself up unreservedly to fight for the Lord. Her children had been her first care. They had all been saved and were fighting for God, except one. The mention of that name brought the same saddening cloud on her lovely face which had dimmed the bright face of my first visitor. But the cloud vanished almost as soon as it came. That one, that unsaved one, was a girl who had been her mother's delight. She had grown up beautiful, the village pride, but alas, had gone astray. It was the old story of wrong and of being seduced into evil ways, and then of utter abandonment to that way of life and all the consequent train of misery. I listened, and I had known some of the sad story on earth, but I had turned away from hearing any more about it, as being non-concerned of mine. Little did I ever think that I would be confronted with it in heaven. And now the bright spirit turned those eyes on me that, beaming with love and concern, were more beautiful than ever. She said to me, "My daughter lived near you. You know her. Have you saved her? I don't know much about her, but I do know that one earnest and determined effort would save her and win her to Christ." And then again she asked me, "Have you saved my child?" I must have cried out in agony. I know I put my hands over my eyes because I could no longer bear to meet her intent look, which now turned to one of pity for me. How long she continued to look at me with an expression of concern almost greater than she had almost shown for her lost child, I do not know. But when I uncovered my eyes, she was gone, and the silvery sheen of her white wings marked her out of my seeking eyes like a speck in the distant blue. Then I cried out, "Oh my God, is this heaven? Will these questions go on forever? Will the meanness and selfishness of my past life haunt me throughout eternity? What shall I do? Can I not go back to earth and do something to redeem myself from the wretched sense of unworthiness?